Hello and welcome to session number 19 for College Success Skills. I am your host, Mr. Fowler. I hope that you're doing well today. I'm recording this on a Tuesday afternoon to try to get a jump on things for Wednesday morning. So you'll probably see this when it's Wednesday, and that'll explain the odd lighting. But in any event, today we have some content from Chapter 12 of our text, College Success Skills. And we're going to be focusing on the second of those two chapters, Chapter 12, today during session number 19. So thank you for joining me. I'm going to quickly cut out and then I'll share today's PowerPoint with you and we'll get things rolling. So anyway, I can't get this rolling without having to show you maybe there's still sometimes when you learn if I finally do that, I'll send you if you know a way and you're savvy or how to use it, tell me. I'm not about the greatest company facilitate their learning. Okay, so today I'm going to spend a little bit of time reviewing chapter 11. But we have to enter chapters and go from one chapter to the next space from Monday to Wednesday. I don't think there's a whole lot of time to lose track of the material content. So I'm going to try to shorten these down. Okay, then after review 10 to review, we have a brief lecture today over chapter 12, subtitled Strategies for Social Science. So this is the first three chapters, 12, 13, 14, that are going to deal with how to use some of the strategies that we have learned about all semester long and inculcated in various different places. So these next three chapters, 12, 13, and 14, focusing on social science, humanities, and mathematics and science courses are going to be used together. So we'll do chapter 12 today and chapters 13 and 14 next week. So no quiz next week because I want to make sure that we get through 12, 13, and 14 before we start that quiz. But in the meantime and in between time, just as a reminder, you have quiz number 4 to complete for this week, along with a new discussion question. So you'll be plenty busy this week attending to the remainder of the content. Okay, so last time we focused on rehearsal strategies. So this is not a very complicated process. We did learn about a couple of new things that I want to review though. Essentially, we explained that the idea of rehearsal is separate and distinct from that of review. Most of the time, rehearsal is an ongoing, elaborate process that asks you to think about things dynamically as they occur in the class. Whereas review is a more structured, short-term, or final term process where you prepare right before a quiz, exam, or test. Rehearsal is important because it emphasizes the way that your memory works and assists in the process of moving content from your short-term memory, which can only hold on to new ideas for a limited capacity, and helping you transfer them from that idea to your long-term memory. So moving elements from your short-term to your long-term memory. They include both written and oral strategies. No matter what kind of strategy you use, of course, though, they should have uh, certain good characteristics associated with them, such as strategies that allow you to self-test. They're flexible, meaning that you can be modified. They can be modified to suit a variety of certain situations. They should include complete and precise information that's well organized and should ask you or task the student with recreating or restating the information in words that are more accustomed to your own way of speech or writing. So your own words. Some new written rehearsal strategies that we're going to be reminded of in today's session is the CARDS strategy, which is cognitive aids for rehearsing difficult subjects. That's where you use an actual note card, and on the front you break down each new term or key idea into organized terms, and then from there you focus on the key term, noting the date or perhaps even page number in the text where you can look that key term up. Then you flip the card over, you define the key term, note some examples, and then list or write down any key point to remember. Now the card system is very helpful because they're very portable. They are a series of note cards after all. They're versatile because they can be used with any class that requires you to learn numerous terms, and they provide multiple ways to recall information. Question and answer strategies can be used with a simple sheet of paper. So you write questions on one sheet of paper, write answers on the other, fold it, and then you can just flip back and forth as a question answer, using a question answer session. Timelines, they're really useful, but they're limited in their use. So when they're useful, they're very useful. But most of the times, they're basically used for chronologically themed ideas or content, including content for the topic that we're talking about today, social sciences. Now, there are also oral review strategies that you can talk about, including reciprocal questioning, where one student takes on the role of an instructor and the other takes on a role of a student. And you are able to use reciprocal questioning to bring all of your various senses into play, encourage multiple perspectives, and use your own words to explain key ideas and new concepts. Plus, having a partner helps you monitor your learning because they can give you feedback. For example, the student playing the role of the instructor doesn't necessarily tell the other student that they're wrong if they miss a question or key term or their definition's off. They give them hints to help them get to the correct answer. Talk-throughs are exactly what they sound like. That's where you say the information or talk it through quietly to yourself. And again, this engages the musculoskeletal memory and can actually kick in an emergency if you need to use it during a test. Now, however you study or review, you should create a specific study plan that asks you to think about what you are reviewing at the beginning of and end of each session, focusing on your talk through cards as a guide to help you remember what you'd studied before and how it's going to be connected to new content. And then in the days leading up to the test, exam, quiz, what have you, try to make sure that you are monitoring your understanding of the concepts that you're going to be tested over. Okay. We wrap that chapter up with an idea about focusing on or forming study groups. Remember that study groups don't have to be comprised of our friends. Study groups can actually be comprised mostly of our classmates. It's good to get a balance of people in a study group in order
to make sure that you've got all sorts of different perspectives being offered up. Now, speaking of perspectives, in order to have a successful study group, you should make sure that everybody comes prepared knowing what their role in the study group is going to be, whether they're going to lead a presentation, assist, or just be part of the audience or offer constructive feedback, or be prepared to jump in when you know a key concept or idea and explain it to your fellow classmates. Members of the study group should be met in, or should be gathered together in a place that is conducive to studying, and there should be a clear goal and structure to the session each and every time students meet. Okay, that's about it for the review. So if you have further questions about the review, and I should mention this today because it will apply to today's review session and probably the review session for the next couple of weeks. You may want to go back and review some of the content from previous presentations just to make sure you have a refresher, because a lot of the material that we're covering this week and next week will all sort of congeal and maybe even inform the other sessions. Okay, time to move on to new material. Today's focus, of course, being strategies that you can use to prepare for social science courses. That's chapter 12 out of your textbook by your authors, Nist Oljilnik and Jody Patrick Holsuch. Let's begin with a brief definition, shall we? What are the social sciences? Well, essentially, as you can see here, the social sciences are any of those classes that contain a study of or are focused on the development of human beings, how they relate to one another, how they relate to the larger society, and how those ideas connect one to the other. This can include any kind of content that deals with the political, economic, social, or cultural, or interpersonal realms of society. So you can see examples right here. Classes like geography, history, economics, civics, citizenship, life in the 21st century. Any of those kinds of topics or courses would fall into the larger banner of the social sciences. Things like psychology and sociology are also a part and parcel of this entire field of endeavor. Even the communications department at Kishwaukee shares some space with this same field of endeavor, right? I work for the ACSS, right? Communications Social Sciences. That's an odd name for a division, I know that, but nevertheless, that's where I find myself. Okay, so here are your study questions to help guide you through today's lecture. Again, I post the study questions so that every time you can review the PowerPoints and go through and check for those moments or instances where I answer each of the following study questions. And even if I don't answer them explicitly, you as a student should take the responsibility for your own learning and go back and make sure that you're understanding how the information is being processed. So, our study questions. How do I read strategically in social sciences courses? What strategies should I use to be successful? And how can I modify my strategies to suit different types of courses and texts? We're going to find out. So the first thing you need to do anytime you are approaching a specific course and study is to ask yourself, what is the task? Now, if you remember all the way back to chapter 2, our authors tell us that there are two components, right, of every challenge that students must face. Understanding the task and adapting your study skills to said task. So first of all, you have to ask yourself, what is being asked of me? Well, social sciences are going to include a wide variety of tasks. So in addition to objective tests, which you're probably very familiar with from secondary education or American high schools, you will probably be asked to synthesize information at a higher level, meaning you may have essays that are assigned or essay questions assigned in an exam or a quiz. You may be asked to complete short answer questions or even take on identification items. The key thing here is to consider what level of thinking is going to be required for the tasks that are assigned to you. If you're memorizing something, that's just a matter of asking yourself what the definition is, what the term means. But at a higher level that you might experience in college in courses like psychology or sociology, you're going to be asked to explain how or why key terms or ideas might relate to larger themes or concepts. Now, a lot of social science courses are heavy lecture courses, which means that it's important for you as a student to be actively engaged, which means you have to practice those active listening techniques that we studied in chapters 3 and 4 and describe your experiences through good notes, which we talked about in chapter 9. Now, when it comes to the specific task of reading social science texts, this is in reference to those discussion questions that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Reading social science texts is actually fairly painless. And here's why. Most of the time, social science-based texts are arranged topically, which means that they're reader-friendly. They usually include some key passages like well-organized terms. They usually have guide questions. And most social science texts include summaries or conclusions along with good introductions, which sort of create a framework for you to think about as you move critically from one point to another. Now, even though it's true that they are typically arranged in a topical manner, especially when it comes to history courses, which is a big feature of social science, they can be chronological in nature. And you should be conscientious because just like in this class, your professor may choose to move around in the text to create an order or synthesize ideas in the way that he or she sees best. The authors of our text in particular stress the importance of text boxes because they often contain test questions that end up in social science courses. So be conscientious when and if you run across text boxes in your social science courses. Now, when you gear up for reading a social science text, of course, you should follow the gearing up questions and suggestions that have been described in earlier chapters of this text. That includes queuing up your prior knowledge. When you get ready to read a social science text, read the chapter title, and then, even before you preview the chapter, ask yourself what, if anything, do you already know about the subject or topic of that chapter? Because remember that good active readers combine information that they know or learn with previously extant information. Oops, went a little too fast. Pardon me. Also think about chapter organization as you gear up to read. try to identify main ideas and make connections between key aspects of the chapter. Also, pay attention to textual supports like visuals, graphs, and diagrams. Captions and charts are usually a big feature for social science classes, as well as photographs and images that convey meaning. And of course, as always, during any preview, whether you're gearing up to read or actively reading or even passively reading, I think it's a good idea to read each chapter and section title, as well as pay attention to prefabricated introductions and conclusions for textbook chapters. Okay. Now, when it comes to the idea of annotating, we remember, of course, that annotating is powerful. And as the image over here on the right-hand side notes, annotating, as a reminder, is when readers make notes and flag moments throughout a text, or perhaps even underline or highlight important details as they're reading. And it can help readers to focus on what they read and understand the details of a text, as well as keep track of thoughts and feelings. This also helps them to prepare for a discussion, because it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, you should always read in advance of a lecture, and you should prepare yourself to write about a particular text. Now, more specifically, when you're annotating a social science textbook, you should start by focusing on major theories that are addressed, especially for courses like psychology and sociology, which might introduce new ideas and theories that you haven't been exposed to in prior education. Especially too with classes like anthropology or geology, which have to do more with the history of the planet and humans' interactions with it, or human interactions over a period of time. Things might be described in various stages or might be characterized in specific ways. So you should pay attention to how those explanations are provided in the text. If, for example, if you're sticking to a sociology and psychology class for a minute, if they note experiments that occur, you might find it important to list the results and larger implications of that experiment. A good example they use from the text is the Pavlovian response, right? Pavlov was a scientist. He wanted to test animals' innate ability to recognize patterns, and he would serve his dogs food after ringing a bell. And after a while, he didn't serve them food and rang the bell and observed their reaction, and they would salivate, meaning that they had built up a pattern of recognition within their minds, right? So how is that applicable to how humans react and develop patterns, or other mammals? Well, that's what you might focus on in that particular class, or in that particular piece of reading or chapter, what have you. So it's important to note the results and implications that an experiment like the Pavlovian experiment might have for larger ideas or concepts. Of course, it's always good to note the comparison and contrasting details, say between two presidencies, or between two similar types of social programs, between the two world wars, for example. And on that note, examples that clarify ideas and how they compare and contrast one to another. Also, watch out for lists of items, because that can be very helpful material to focus on, especially if you bring the cards, writing measure or rehearsal measure into play. In addition to annotating for those ideas, for social science texts specifically, you should look for keywords that are going to be leading to valuable information within the text themselves, including keywords that might denote examples, such as suppose or in one study. Look for keywords that tell the rest of the story, in addition to, moreover, furthermore, or summarize ideas, hence, thus, therefore, in sum. Additional keywords might be, of course, those listed items, first, second, next, finally, as well as words that hedge, meaning they suggest heavily that information might be flexible, or that an understanding or theory about how to relate data to a larger idea or key concept is being handled. Words like maybe, perhaps, or probably would crop up in a social science text, more so than, say, a math or science text, which we'll look at next week. Lastly, superlatives can be good keywords. Keywords, let's just call them keywords. And of course, these include examples like best, worst, most, least, major, key, or particularly important. Now, we spent quite a bit of time in chapter 7 and 8 thinking about the process of note-taking. So with a heavy lecture course, which is often how social science courses are described, many teachers will lecture heavily. So there are a few things that you can do to augment your note-taking adventures in social science courses. Obviously, many teachers will lecture heavily, so some of the information is going to be text-based. That's why it's important to annotate, even if your instructor talks a mile a minute. I'm always reminded of my first instructor of my first college class. It was the Introduction to Western Civilization, number 2. For some reason, number 1 was filled up, so I had to jump into number 2 of the course. Really odd. But good old Mr. Sitzma, I think he's still teaching at Rockford University. And the guy was just incessant. He lectured for the whole 60 minutes. Maybe there were 5 minutes of review at the beginning and end of each class discussing what we talked about previously. And I remember falling into the trap of scribbling furiously, trying to take down every bit of information he said. And that's not a very effective way to take notes, right? We'll talk about that next week when I describe how to avoid note-taking in the humanities. It's called the monk method, where you just furiously scribble away. Don't do that. Realize that there's going to be a lot of information in the text that you can go back and reread, or that you should have read in advance of each lecture. But a lot of the material you're going to get is new and supplemental from the instructors themselves. After all, a good instructor does go above and beyond the reading of the text. If it were just using somebody to read a text day in and day out, you're not getting a whole lot out of that process. You could read the book. You could stay in your dorm when it's cozy and under a blanket with a nice light and read the text and be as effective as any other student if you are an autodidactic reader who pushed yourself. And some students do that. In large universities where they don't take attendance, you don't feel like going to class? Read the book. Take good notes, annotate your text. Chances are you're probably not going to miss anything that's critically important, but you might miss out on some of the fun stuff, the highlights or the insights that the instructor has to offer. So you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. Specifically though, and I love the specific information that these texts offer up, and you can see over here, we have an example of this, the T method. So when you're developing your notes in social science classes, one thing you might want to do to prepare for each lecture is use a T section, as you see here, where you divide the paper into questions, and then or preview questions, and then you write your responses or answers down, along with a name, date, and, of the lesson, and a title if it has one. It could be even something generic like I use for each session. Roughly you have between 30 and 32 sessions per semester. In fall, you run into, In fall, you run into Labor Day, which we did this year. And then in the spring, you have spring break, but you also have days like Dr. King's birthday, which are early in the semester, but they're days that some schools don't hold classes. So your session numbers might vary. But essentially over 16 weeks, if you meet 2 to 4 times a week, if you meet 2 times a week, that's 32 sessions. We used to meet on Fridays, and that it seems bizarre to me that nowadays most schools don't have Friday sessions, or rarely they do. So in a standard semester, let me see if I can do that real quick in my head. Let's see, I would have 3 times 16 weeks. I had 48 classes that I had to be responsible to attending. And I had 3 to 4 classes per semester. So you're getting into a lot of over 100 sessions. So when you think about taking notes for each and every session, it's good to have a title or a date or something like that in mind. Title and date would be ideal. They also suggest you might want to combine ideas from the split page method. That way you can fold the piece of paper over and use it as a testing or quizzing document as well. If you want to review the specific details of the T method or the split page or parallel note method, you can go back to chapter 10 or back to the chapter 10 PowerPoint and review some ideas related to that. Okay, now that you've got the idea, how do you study in the social sciences? Well, like I said, just last Monday, and again at the top of this particular session, we discussed the CARDS system. And the CARDS system is especially useful in psychology because you're learning a lot of new key terms and ideas and definitions in courses like that when you first take the course in college. I will pause for a second, been relatively sidetracked today for some reason, but they're important sidetracks. I'll sidetrack by saying that while it's true some high schools have created basic psychology classes now, it's not so common that I would expect everyone to be familiar with psychology when they started college. Maybe in a couple years that will change, but as of right now, most of us are introduced to ideas around in and involving psychology when we take college courses. So the CARDS system, again, is especially helpful because it is focused around organizing terms and linking together key ideas. It's also best used when you know you're going to encounter an objective test, which will ask you multiple choice, identification, true and false questions, that sort of thing. Kind of the Mr. Fowler method of studying. Question and answer sessions can also be very helpful for studying in the social sciences, but more so when you know you've got short answer questions or more objective level terms to memorize. Just be sure that you're asking the right kinds of questions. Try to avoid what is or what is the definition of, as opposed to how do terms relate, or explain the theory relating to, or explain the theory of, etc. Try to go beyond simply memorizing material and synthesize the information that you're studying in order to be sure that you truly grasp it and understand it and can rely on your own words and expertise to establish your understanding. Many students, again, try to memorize facts when they approach a course like psychology, sociology, or another such course in the social sciences. But most material related to the field of social science is theoretical. And there's not a lot of terminology and factual information to memorize in the first place. In addition to that, social science presents a unique level of difficulty because students are asked to track information over large spans of time. That's why it's really important to take good notes. And they mention in our chapter that the Cornell method or parallel method of note-taking is a good strategy or a good method that you might want to employ, especially in social science related courses. All right, wasn't that a short little rundown? I thought it was. It seemed to move right along for me. But that's really all I have for this week's session or today's session. So for next time, we're going to continue right along the lines of this these next few chapters. We're going to go right from 12 to 13. College success strategies. Strategies for the humanities is up next. And you can find that in your text on pages 166 to page 181. And I'll do another presentation. So it's, again, strategies for the humanities for next Monday, and then strategies for science and mathematics next Wednesday. When we get ready with that, I will have a summary day where we kind of combine and look for similarities about methods of study. And that will lead us into a quiz. So we'll probably have, next week will be a regular week. And then the week after that, we'll have a quiz over chapters 12, 13, and 14. Because they all kind of go together, talking about various methods for studying for the various different branches. Then we're left, believe it or not, with only one more chapter to cover, chapter 15, which is all about using technology. So we will get into chapter 15 probably in the second week of November, and I'll give you a short quiz on that, a short objective style quiz on using technology to learn. It's only about, 6 pages? 195 to page 202. Well, 195 to 200, that'd be 5? And then 200 would be 6. Well, 5, 6, yeah, about 7 pages. So things are wrapping up relatively quickly. Then the last 2 weeks of class, leading into December, I will introduce your final essay project. It's actually more like a short answer project, which will ask you to sort of think about the totality of what you've learned this semester, what takeaways you can establish, what's valuable or outstanding or beneficial from this course. And it'll stand as a sort of grade justification project if you've ever done one of those before, which I'm sure many of you have. Okay, here, escape. And there I am, back to the video. I just like to come back, just like to come back and sort of wrap things up at the end of each session. So I hope that this has been beneficial to you today. If it's not, maybe allude to that, allude to what, it's not going to be very conducive as we learned from the text, to say, oh, Mr. Fowler, this is kind of boring, and I sort of hate this. This is like the worst class I have this semester. That may be the case. I hope it's not. But you can think of ways that you could respond in the weekly comments by saying, you know, this particular chapter was interesting, but I wish I could have asked questions about X, Y, and Z. Or I read this in the text and Mr. Fowler didn't discuss that. I wonder why that is. That may be an interesting way to spice up the discussion questions. And I know that I've been a bit lax. A good instructor doesn't respond to every question, believe it or not. I respond to some of the earliest questions, and I'm going to be more responsive this week and in the weeks that follow. It's just that, to be frank, folks, I do read all of your comments, or a majority of them, but sometimes there's not much for me to say in terms of original thought. But I do want to reach out and give some praise back to a student who does appreciate the discussion forums. He appreciates your feedback and the feedback that I offer as well. So I need to make sure that I am active and responsive this week, because I know that's important to a lot of you. Okay, enough soapbox. You stuck around long enough after the end of the actual material. So I appreciate your time and your tenacity this week. I hope you get after it. Don't forget to create a response for the discussion questions. And remember that quiz 4 is up and ready for you when you are ready to finish it. Until next time, this is Mr. Fowler. I'll talk to you later.